welcome to the Franklin Lakes located High Mountain Presbyterian Church. I'm Pastor Luke Kilgore, and I am serving here. This is the beginning of my 14th year here as the pastor of the High Mountain Presbyterian Church, and I'm glad to offer this recording of a Bible study that we will get underway momentarily. We have some discussion partners who normally join us through the miracle of Zoom, and then we broadcast the conversation to you. And so if you're watching at home or if you're watching during the week, we're happy to have you be a part of it in that way. Again, I said I'm Pastor Lou Kilgore, and this is the High Mountain Presbyterian Church, a place where we live our faith with our minds. We're not afraid to invite God into the renewing of our minds as we seek the renewal also of our ability to live as human beings who trust in God, who learn to trust each other, and who learn to be trustworthy, although we often fail, and then have to seek the other miracle of faith, which is forgiveness. And together we walk a journey in faith in that way. So tonight we are going to be reading and discussing a wedding psalm. This is a psalm constructed by the psalmist to be recited at a wedding, but in particular a wedding of a king. It's a royal wedding, and all the majesty and beauty and you know, just the stuff that attends a royal wedding, gold and garments and beautiful music, and it's a wonder in that way. Here comes Elaine. Hello, Elaine. How are you tonight? I'm going to put my microphone down for a second and come over and turn on the multiple view.
No.
There we are. Debbie's here also. Hello, Debbie.
Hello.
Hello. Hello. And there's Barbara.
Hello.
Oh, you're popping up all over the place here.
All three of us?
Yeah, all three of you. Yes. That's okay. That's better than all one of me sitting here staring at myself.
That's true.
Yep. So, how's everybody? It's Tuesday. How you faring in the week so far?
Terrible.
Really?
You
Really?
I have to go tomorrow for a root canal.
Oh, dear.
I've had an infection in my tooth since last week, and I've been on antibiotics, and it turns out it's a very, very old root canal that wasn't completed. The endodontist I went to yesterday said she found that they neglected to finish the job.
Oh,
There
dear.
was a canal left with a nerve that's, now infected. So they got to go in and take the post out and redo the whole thing. And then, So, and I'm not feeling too great. But aside from that, and it was a tooth that's probably between 30 and 40 years ago it happened. And hasn't bothered me since, but it just flared up.
Oh, dear.
On Thursday. It was awful. Yeah, you know how a toothache feels. You feel like knocking the tooth out yourself, but
Yeah, you might regret that.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Sometimes
Right,
it's
sometimes
right.
They imagine that's the only relief you're going to get, but
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, so tomorrow I'll get it. I'll get it started because it usually takes 2 or 3 visits to get it done.
Oh, gee. But hopefully it'll start feeling better after tomorrow.
It actually felt better over the weekend from all the antibiotics. It did
Okay.
relieve, I'm not like, but now it's just, I've been taking a lot of aspirin, and I thought before I bleed to death, I better cut back on the aspirin. And so now it's like, it's bearable, but I know it's there, so we'll get it done tomorrow. Yeah.
hi, Judy.
Oh, well.
Hi, Judy.
Hello.
Hi.
I,
Hello, Judy.
We're just,
I came in on the tail end. What?
Oh, I've got a tooth that needs a root canal.
Oh,
Yeah, so,
so we could write a psalm of lament. We could
Yeah,
write a
lament,
psalm
yeah.
of lament about a tooth
right.
gone bad.
song and a psalm, a song and a psalm.
Psalm. Yeah. So
Oh,
we're lamenting together. Oh my goodness.
Nice to be.
I hate toothaches. Oh my goodness.
yeah.
I know.
Mm.
Not fun.
I'm a little cranky, but
All right, well, we'll keep that in mind as we listen to your comments.
right.
Do you like weddings?
Yeah.
Okay, good, because that's what our reading tonight is Psalm 45, and it's a royal wedding. And
Oh,
as I was reading it and getting ready for tonight, I'm trying to listen for and wait for, okay, what are the life-encouraging dimensions of this psalm? It's really a celebration of a wedding between a king and his princess. And I don't know, it's just, to me, it's more of just a historical relic. I mean, here it is. There's a sampling of a big royal wedding which is taking place, and the commentators make a big deal of the fact that the constructor of this kind of a reverie would not be a writer. It would be an oral poet. Someone who's just orating this poetry is just being sung out into the universe. And someone is writing it down. But it's being conducted almost as an, extemporaneous improvisation. That's the word I was looking for.
Yeah.
With the right direction toward the king and all the beautiful things and the majesty of the king, and then ultimately to the bride as well. Now, behind this, there is, it's very foreign to the way I think. But in a theophany, there is a very strong idea that the king is God's representative on earth. Not even, representative is too soft a word. That the king is God's incarnation on the earth. And when the king sits on the king's throne, the king is sitting on the throne of God. And this, I'm just going to say this because we'll be into this then. The reason that the monarchy and the king was held in such high esteem was that in human experience, and I don't know if you could shop this around to other cultures or not, but in human experience, chaos in society was the purest form of evil. Chaos is equivalent to evil. And the hope of the king and the hope of the king's link to God was that the king and the king's administration would bring order. So that, we often say for Presbyterians, orderliness is next to godliness. Well, we didn't invent that.
No.
And I think it probably, I'm going to say this without foundation, but I think in all human civilizations, human beings experience a lack of order, or I'm going to use the more drastic word, the chaos, as almost the undoing of everything that is good. And that if you're going to find what's good, good comes through order. And order is brought to the society, to the community, in this case, in a theophany, from the king. And you're going to hear in this poem of the wedding, the celebration of this king is it's the ultimate dream of societies, of human beings together. The ultimate dream is that the king, in carrying out, bringing about order and all the good things of life, will be about kindness and love and, those virtues that we so long for, ultimately, that lead to peace. So the dream of having a king who is God on earth is that the essential elements of God will be there and administered in an orderly way among the people. This was, it was Charlemagne. This was the dream of Charlemagne in Middle England. The idea that a great and loving king was the absolute ideal form of government. So, and I think I'll just going to say this and then we'll talk more about it as we go along. I think that American society is toying with this idea again, that a king might be the answer, but I think we're leaving out one essential element, and that is that, in order for that to work, the king has to actually be a kind and loving person who loves all and who loves justice, the real capital J justice, the benevolent king, through the experience of human beings, has long been the hope that this is how we could best live with each other as human beings on this planet. Now, what do you want to say about that?
I'm thinking of the statement, the divine right of kings. Is that where that statement would come from?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's the Divine Right of Kings document is the, I don't know, it's the further development of this idea. Mm-hmm. It's a development in ancient society that they had tried. I mean, in the biblical story, I know it's an oversimplification, but in the biblical story, the stage of early development of civilization happened when the prophets, when Samuel was the leader of the people of God. But he was not a king. He was a clergyman. he was, and the idea was that a clergy person would be able to stir the hearts of the people to orderly and decent living, to follow the mission of God in the world. And there's a sense in which that works, but boy, if you look at Samuel, he was not a decent human being. Samuel,
It was very flawed, yeah.
he was really, shocking comments ring back to me from my seminary days. My Old Testament professor said at the time the Ayatollah Khomeini was very big in terms of, his control and power, and this was a time when the hostages were being held, and Jimmy Carter was trying his best to get them released. And the professor said that Samuel, who I was raised to worship as an outstanding human being, this professor, Tom McDaniel, said that if you really look into the life of Samuel, you will find a complete autocrat who carried out with viciousness what he believed was what God wanted to have done. So, and the reason for that was that the people of God seeking to live with God as the king, invisible but above us and still following God, the problem was they were getting invaded from neighboring nations. And they had no defense. And so the ultimate dream of a government grew into, let's get a king, because a king would create a stronger centralized defense than the clergy person. The preacher can't defend us from anything. The preacher can tell us what God wants and tell us how to live and, and punish us even sometimes. But the preacher, that's not what we need. What we need is someone with real power. And so they demanded from Samuel a king. And so then the whole king motif really covers almost all the rest of the Bible. It survives throughout the Hebrew scriptures and is borrowed over into, in the early Christian community, you hear the litanies of the Christian community calling Christ the King. There's still very much this king and the kingdom of Christ. Jesus talked about the kingdom of God. And several times, if you remember, in the New Testament, there were movements to make Jesus a king. You remember those times? They fashioned a crown. They were going to put a crown on his head, and he disappeared. Once they almost threw him off a cliff because he wouldn't accept the role of king. And then you have the great sort of culmination of Jesus' life and the Roman rule when Pilate turns to Jesus and says, "Are you a king?" And Jesus says, "My kingdom, if you will, is not of this world." And it sort of threw off the mantle. He threw off the mantle of all the hope in the world that, the best thing that could happen would be that Jesus would turn out to be that benevolent king. And Jesus rejects it. It's like, that's not going to work. And so the king redefines entirely what will be the motive or the motif that will allow what will bring about the way of God in the world, which is really what the kingdom of God means. When and how and where will the world finally correspond to life going the way God wants it to go? And Jesus is a major disappointment because Jesus seems to say, not by might, not by power, not by power over, but he says to his disciples, "Look at what I have done for you. I have washed your feet. I bring to you a new sense of how, if you need to use the idea of kingdom, how will God's reign happen in the world? And the way it will happen will be through, I will be a servant, and I will turn to the least of those in the world. And I won't build a big city. And I won't build a great big temple for God to dwell in. Because Jesus says the temple of God is in you. And in some ways, in an effort, again, these people are tired of chaos. They're tired of unstructured life. And they're longing for some powerful initiative to come along and create. Maybe it won't be perfect, but at least it'll be orderly. So there's my summary of the whole Bible for you. How do you like that?
Love it. Love it.
Right. That.
So let's read the psalm, and when we read it, I want you to be listening in the background for this idea. Why is a royal wedding so important, and what is it about the royals? What is the hope of the royals and the strength of a royal couple? What's behind it in terms of why they're so interested and exciting about it? Okay? So who's our reader for tonight?
Mm-hmm.
Don't all jump in at once.
I will read.
All right.
Didn't want to let everyone not have the opportunity, but
What psalm are we on?
Oh, Psalm 45. Psalm
okay.
45.
this says, to the leader, according to lilies of the Korahites, a loving song, a love song. My heart overflows with a godly theme. I address my verses to the king. My tongue is like the pen of a ready scribe. You are the most handsome of men. Grace is poured upon your lips. Therefore, God has blessed you forever. Gird your sword on your thigh, O mighty one, in your glory and majesty. In your majesty, ride on victoriously. The cause of truth and to the right. Let your right hand teach you to dread deeds. Your arrows are sharp in the heart of the king's enemies. The people that fall under you. Your throne, O God, endures forever and ever. Your royal scepter is a scepter of equity. You have righteousness and hate. You love righteousness and hate wickedness. Therefore, God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness beyond your companions. Your robes are all fragrant with myrrh and aloes and cassia. From ivory palaces, stringed instruments make you glad. Daughters of kings are among your ladies of honor. At your right hand stands the queen in gold of Ophir. Hear, O daughter, consider and incline your ear. Forget your people and your father's house, and the king will desire your beauty. Since he is your Lord, bow to him. The people of Tyre will seek your favor with gifts, the richest of the people with all kinds of wealth. The princess is decked in her chamber with gold woven robes. In many colored robes, she is led to the king. Behind her, the virgins, her companions, follow. With joy and gladness, they are led along as they enter the palace of the king. In the place of ancestors, you, O king, shall have sons. You will make them princes in all the earth. I will cause your name to be celebrated in all generations. Therefore, the people will praise you forever and ever.
Comments? Thoughts?
Well, I guess I'm thinking that a lot of this makes the illusion of king as God on earth, just like you said, God's vice regent here on earth, because they're talking about the king in terms that you would talk about God.
Right. Yep. I think at the next wedding that I have to do, I'm gonna read I'm gonna read the part I'm gonna read the part where the instructions to the princess. She is brought to the king. Oh, where was it? Where was it? Oh, hear, O princess, look and listen and forget your people and your father's house. In other words, forget about your family, honey. Like, you don't need to think about your family at all anymore. Okay? The king longs for your beauty, for he is your Lord. Give him respect. There's no room at the top for two here in this.
Well, mine says bow to him.
Yes. Yeah, I'm going to put that in the wedding ceremony.
Yeah, you'll be popular.
Look,
Yeah, I know.
wait till, see if she says, I do.
Right.
Oh, my
That's right.
goodness.
People
You
always,
gotta be kidding.
couples would always say to me when they would come in, I would say, well, what are you thinking about? And they'd say, well, we'd like a traditional wedding. And I go,
Yeah.
I don't think you want a traditional wedding. I don't think you would know what a traditional wedding involves. I think
Yep.
you have a very slanted idea of that. But, clearly there's no idea that the princess, not in this psalm, that the princess carries out any of those roles that the God on earth king will carry out. The only role there's hope for, and that is that she's going to give birth to sons.
Right.
Or else.
Yeah, and those, yes, and those sons
Jill?
will carry out this phenomenal incarnation. This is now God on earth. And, I suppose it makes sense. I mean, if God could actually inhabit a human being in such a way as to control their appetite and their hunger for power and their greed and all those things, if God could actually be incarnated in this king, what would be wrong with that? We have a truly benevolent, loving, justice-sharing king who has the power to redistribute wealth and has the power to take care of the sick and to attend to the isolated and the lonely. God's will carried out through a human being on earth. I love it. No need for elections. This guy's got it.
I think that's what Trump thinks.
Yeah. Sounds familiar.
Elaine, you're muted. I can see you're talking, but I can't hear you. There you go.
So why, when Jesus came and he was tempted to be made into a king, did he not take that position? If it be so great.
Well, yeah. That's an interesting question, and it would lead me into saying things that are heresy. Because
Nothing new.
I know. But I really believe that what happened is that crowd that tried to make Jesus king, he thought he was educating them about the fact that they did not need a king. That they needed instead an infilling of the Holy Spirit of God to allow them to be the ministers of God's grace in the world. And the heresy part is, I think, 20, 30, 40 years after the community of Jesus organized, and the only organization they had was an agape feast that took place on Sunday morning. They would get together and they had a massive banquet. And food was shared, and racial lines were dissolved, and the soldiers ate with the slaves, and there was this massive outbreak of egalitarianism in the name of Jesus. And they would collect food for the needy. And then, true to human form, the church began to organize to make Jesus a king. After he's dead and gone or resurrected, of course the resurrection, they say, was when he became king. I don't think you can find a basis for that in Scripture. You can find a basis for it in the theology that developed among human beings. And so you have I mean, I don't mean to pick on Catholics, but, you know, right across the street here, we have 50 acres of land, and there's a tower of a statue of Jesus, and the cemetery is called Christ the King. And the cemetery is divided into the north, the south, the east, and the west, and there's Jesus, the statue of Christ, not Jesus, but Christ, the resurrected Christ, who is now King of the world. And during the Middle Ages and during even times after that, Christians, I guess, well-meaning Christians, have believed in Christendom. In Christendom, that what Jesus was all about was creating God's kingdom on earth. And in order for that to happen, you had to have, you know, people in power. My seminary professors will tell you that the biggest mistake that was ever made, or the big derailing of the theology of Jesus and the movement of the Jesus movement, happened in the year 300 when Caesar converted to Christianity. And when Caesar converted to Christianity, he went to the tower and made a proclamation that now all Romans were Christians. That's it. They were made Christians in one swoop of the scepter of the king. And in that, the movement of love and grace and justice and egalitarianism that was the Jesus movement became Christendom. It became the kingdom. It became an empire. And we've had very little, I think, very little expressions of, I don't know, of Christianity that has been able to avoid the temptation of empire. So now you can call up the police and have me arrested.
The evangelicals will get you.
Oh, yeah, they will. Because it's heresy. It's you know, I'm preaching and teaching that Christ didn't come to establish a kingdom on earth. He did not. He came to establish a ministry. He came to establish really substantial actions of love and grace and the stirring of justice. And I also believe, in the long run, he came to point to God's desire for orderliness. I think that's still important. You know, I've never lived in a country after the government has fallen. But even a bad government, when it's fallen and there's no orderliness, my reading of history is it's a terrible time to be alive. You know, every person for themselves.
If someone wants a strong leader, does that kind of, are they giving up their power to do anything, in the sense that they'll let that person take care of everything for them, and not taking a responsibility for themselves and for the rest of humanity?
As you're saying it, I'm agreeing with everything you're saying. I mean, I really think that is the problem, is what is the meaning of a strong leader? If a strong leader is someone that you can relinquish your responsibilities to, and someone you can relinquish your share of the needed action in society, then I see trouble brewing. You know?
Is that not close to a cult? I mean, I guess I'm thinking of today, what's going on in our government today.
Well, I think it can go to any range. You know, it exists in all kinds of ranges. I see it inside large congregations. Large congregations. I mean, you can read the stories about pastors who emerge at the top of large congregations, and people come into the setting of the church, and in a very massive agreement way, that leader of that congregation takes charge of their lives, tells them how they should live and what they should do, and to me, worse, how they should understand the Bible. And then that power goes to that person's head, and before you know it, they're in the newspaper, having abused all kinds of power, and people are shocked. But if people are turning over, they're turning over their own, ride your own bike. Get on your bike and ride your bike. There's nothing wrong with having a leader of the bicycles, along the way who knows how to inspire and move people in a certain direction. Jesus himself thought that, human beings are like sheep. We need direction. We need encouragement in a direction. We travel together better in herds, if you will. But he also cautioned that, the leader of the sheep, in his time, Jesus said, he wasn't saying all the sheep have gone astray. He's saying the blind are leading the blind. The leaders are blind. They're blind with their own greed. They're blind with all kinds of things that have nothing to do with what the goals of God's way in the world is. What is God's way in the world? That's God's way. What's it mean to have God's way?
Well, I don't think it's, if you just start listing things, I don't think that it would necessarily attract very many people.
Which one? The do your own part? Take responsibility?
Be a servant.
Be a servant?
Be humble.
Right.
Be humble. Share what you have. I mean, there's so many things that are, not very, they're not glitzy. They're not attractive.
No, they're not. And
On the surface, at least, they're not.
Right.
And
I think even deep down, they're not attractive. They're scary. I mean, I think all these people, football games, who hold up John 3:16, and they celebrate John 3:16 as the greatest thing in the world, there's God's love for the world. And I go, listen carefully, people. This love that is displayed in John 3:16 is that a love that causes God to sacrifice God's self. Are you listening? Are you listening to the definition of love that is built in there? That, love calls us to love in such a way that we are servants, that we give up what would normally might be entitled to. And that is, how do we know that's the way of God? Because that's what Jesus demonstrated on the cross. And I do not share theologies that have Jesus being sent to the cross by God. I don't. I think Jesus went the way of the cross because it was the pathway for him to fulfill his greatest sense of being a servant. He was a servant. And, everybody says, well, the resurrection undid all that. I don't believe that. Luther did not believe that. Luther thought the most significant thing in the Christian experience was the death of Jesus on the cross. He minimized, Luther and all the Lutheran movement minimized the resurrection. But
that's how I grew up.
What's that?
That's how I grew up.
Yeah, that's right.
In the Lutheran church, yeah.
And so the cross becomes that call to us to say, well, what is God's way in the world? It's service.
Giving up yourself.
Yeah, giving of yourself. It's the royal way.
It doesn't sound very orderly, though.
You're right. You're right.
It's much easier just to have one person to tell you everything you need to do and then get on with it. I mean, this ode to a king on his wedding day is the opposite of being a servant of God. It sounds like God is almost the servant of this king.
Right.
You know, it's kind of upside down. And gosh, when you genderize, what's the most wonderful, the most esteemed is a man sitting on a throne. I mean, even in this, he has a queen already. This is, he's going for multiple wives here. So women are just there, like you said, to procreate. So you're putting all the majesty of God into one guy. That seems the antithesis of Jesus's message.
I agree
mean,
entirely.
The words, the poetry here is beautiful. If I'd like to go and see that wedding. It sounds really nice. But, as a plan for humankind, it leaves a lot to be desired. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think there's a competing throughout not just this psalm, but throughout the Hebrew scriptures, throughout the Old Testament. There is a strong competition. I mean, when David becomes king, there's the epitome of okay, this is God's great idea. David is the greatest king of all. And he now sits on the throne of God, and all the world's wealth comes to Jerusalem, and the Ark of the Covenant is there, and everything is great, and they have more power than any nation within riding or warring distance. They are the conquerors of all. And I think if you step back from the story and you don't keep yourself immersed in it, you find that the writers of the story build it all up, and then they go, I wonder what happened. I wonder what happened. Because it's not long, and it isn't even the Bathsheba and the death of her husband. That's horrible enough of how the king tries to continue to conquer and take over, but it's only just a couple of years, and his own son is planning an assassination of him. And his own son leads half, actually maybe even a little more than half of the kingdom in a revolution seeking to overthrow this beautiful, wonderful, God-anointed kingdom. I go, what? Who's writing this story? And I've said this before, I'm still kind of shocked at the way Christians still tell the story of David and the conquests and David, he was the king after God's own heart.
He had his moments, didn't he?
All right, you name them. What were they?
Dancing.
Oh, yeah. Guy knew how to dance.
Was a good musician.
He was a great musician. And actually, when he was a small boy with ruddy cheeks and had not much to sort of brag about, he was beloved. But he
had a good friendship with Jonathan.
He had a wonderful friendship with Jonathan. And in fact, people who say, the Bible says it's a sin for a man to lie with a man. I want to go, you are not listening to what it says about David's relationship with Jonathan. It says that they were so much in love that they shared a common heart. I mean, you could put that on a Valentine's Day card. Come on. You got to wake up and realize what they're saying. And so, okay, what are you going to make of that? It's beautiful. It's truly beautiful. And even, even when David was struggling to get the kingdom, and Saul was still the king, David had several moments where in his own humility. He had one time, they stumbled across Saul's encampment, and he had Saul at the end of a sword, and he did not kill him.
Right. He had his moments, you see.
Okay, see? You said it, and then I had to prove it. He had his moments.
But then he went a little power mad.
Well, yeah, because he really got used to, he was a good military tactician, and as a result, he was able to turn back the invasions of neighboring countries. He was able to create a safe nation where people could live in peace.
But he also launched a lot of invasions.
Oh, he certainly did. He got,
Yeah.
he got
And I
used.
think that's what this psalmist is saying here too. I mean, he's equating, I think, the author is equating this king with God.
Yes.
And God blesses this king with what attributes? Well, he's handsome. So you have to have physical beauty.
Right.
You have to be a man. Be a man.
Right.
And you gotta be a good warrior because gird your sword on your thigh, there's a lot of martial references in here too. So you've got to be a good warrior. Of course, you have to love righteousness and hate wickedness. That goes with the job, but it does to a certain extent,
Well,
I guess.
it does. I think, we have to be careful not to list those as throwaways, because verse 4 or 5 says, dominate. This is the hope for the king. Go dominate. I don't know what your translations say. Dominate, prosper, and ride out on behalf of truth, humility, and justice. Man, that's awesome. That's beautiful. If the king's going to have power and the king's going to have the authority of God, then let the king have that be their mission statement. Nothing wrong with that, I don't think. But and then the power over evil people. You're going to have arrows and swords, and they're going to be enemies of the king, which I guess are enemies of the truth and enemies of humility. Wow, they want the king to have humility. And so in that way, the eternal and everlasting God has enthroned you, and the scepter of your kingdom is the scepter of uprightness. Wow.
I think it's kind of hard to have a lot of humility when everybody has to bow to you, though. That's kind of tough.
Yes.
That might go to your head after a while.
Right.
It's an impossible job, I guess. I don't know.
Well,
Anyway.
yeah, and I think the idea was if the king didn't lose sight of what this is all about, the king would defer or deflect all of that lauding and celebrating to God. This is all rightly directed to God, which is kind of the model that Jesus tried to live out according to the writers of the Gospels. There were throngs of people who were coming to Jesus, and Jesus deferred all of that to God. Even at the miracle of the feeding of 5,000 and the feeding of the 4,000, people wanted to say, "Oh, Jesus will," and Jesus deflected all of that to say, don't call me. What was that phrase he says? Don't call me teacher.
Don't call me good.
Yeah, don't call me good.
Right.
Don't call me teacher. You have one teacher who's in heaven.
He also said, I didn't come here to make peace between you and your family even.
Right,
I mean,
right.
He's going to be, yeah, well, Jesus would be the kind of king that
Go back in.
would be best for society, I think. But we get these other kinds of kings who really can't be humble. I mean, if it's impossible. And they end up destroying themselves and their society after a while. And then, you're looking for a new king.
No, I agree with you. Jesus would be a great king. But Jesus' way of being a king gets him killed. So he doesn't last very long. He doesn't.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, Jesus as king was God.
That's right. And he never wanted to lose sight of that. Mm-hmm. And I know it's politically laden, so I'll say that right up front. But, I think back to the presidency of Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter was elected as president, but he carried out his presidency in a way that frustrated everybody who wanted a dictator. He was a negotiator. He was a conversator. He was, he wanted to sit down and talk things out. He wanted to create consensus. And it drove the Democrats and the Republicans crazy, which is why he did not get a second term. He was not okay as a politician.
I think that's why you have a lot of people now saying such things as, we don't really want democracy. We'd like a strong man to tell us what to do, because democracy is messy. You got to talk things out. You got to compromise. Nobody gets what they really want. Everybody gets a little piece of what they want, but nobody's satisfied. I don't know. That's frustrating.
Maybe because of Carter, we now have, what's his name? Mr.
Well, I don't know about that.
Well, I wouldn't draw a direct line from Jimmy Carter to him, but
Yeah.
there are all kinds of leadership, and there's all kinds of definition of strength of leadership. I've watched two movies recently that carry, I've still got legs in my head with them. One is the story of Nelson Mandela after he got out of jail. And what kind of president was he going to be? And how annoying and frustrating he was to his own people, because he would not move in with strength. He was an elected president by a massive majority of people. He could have done whatever he wanted to the Afrikaners, and they knew it. But what did he do? He deferred all of that for the unity of the country. And, so at least in the movie, they talk about how, in the end, in movies, people change their minds. and they're won over. And then the other movie that I've been watching, and I've been go back and rewatch it, it's a movie about the rise of Hitler. It's called After the War, and it's a story, a documentary story about Germany after World War I, and why and how did hundreds of thousands of people give over to the Nazis, to Adolf Hitler. And in the movie, they have long excerpts of his speeches. And you listen to what he was saying to them and what he was promising them about how their nation would rise up out of the ashes, because they would then be strong together, and he was going to lead them.
But isn't that a reference to a little bit of what's going on here today, too?
Yeah. Judy, you are determined to get me to say that kind of stuff. And I don't
get rid of it. I want to get rid of it. I want some kind of escape. I'm looking.
Why did it happen here? In the sense of, we didn't have a depression. The people, why are people willing to give over their rights, is basically what I'm thinking. I don't.
It's difficult to understand, isn't it?
I can't understand it.
Well, so I'll show you what kind of arrogant leader I am. I'll answer that question. So here's my thoughts. What is the equivalency of the desolation and the terrible abomination that the Germans felt after World War I? It won't sound like it, but I think it was the wreckage of the 1920s and 30s and 40s and 50s idea of white America. Gay men and women were given permission to marry. That's a bomb. That is a bomb that drops right smack in the middle of American society, and the laws uphold it, and the laws say, yes, that's fine. In the Bible Belt, and my family, although they're from southeastern Pennsylvania, they actually are in the Bible Belt. They're below the Mason-Dixon line. The Mason-Dixon line runs through the southern part of Pennsylvania. And I will tell you that when the legalization of gay marriage happened, my brother was in the pulpit preaching about the desolation of American society. And so you take gay liberation, whatever you want to, and then expand it now to sex change, science, and all the rest of that. These people are knocked to the ground in terms of their understanding of what is going on. And
They have definite gender roles, and you cannot violate them. And that is why women are losing autonomy of their own bodies, because they want to go back to women know your place and men have another place. Your functions are different. They don't want to blur the lines. I mean, that when you talk about, gay marriage, that blurs the line. When you talk about transgendered people, that blurs the line. That creates chaos for people who like to go back to the orderliness of two genders. We understand that, and that's
And
not
white.
the real world.
And white.
And white, and white. I think
Yep.
the white issue is very big, you
Yep.
know? And so what does it ultimately involve? Like I say, if you could picture, I still have these pictures in my mind of after the war, what Germany was like. The buildings, the streets, everything was in rubble. And I don't think we understand, really, how the foundations of white Christian America have been blown apart. The change and the role of women in this society is a crater. It is a crater of wrong, of destruction that has come into, again, because I'm not that far away from it, the preachers in the Bible Belt will preach that the very foundation, there's the word, the foundation of American society is the orderliness of the American family. And it has to do with men fulfilling their role as men, males who are like in this king description here, women being subservient to men and seeing it as their spiritual duty, and then children come along, but they are raised in the shelter and the structure of this very foundational idea. The James Dobson in his whole institution for the American family, it isn't small. It is massive in terms of American society. And everything they stand for is gone or is soon to disappear
Right, at least,
entirely.
What I also don't understand, though, is, and I'm reading a book now about Ireland in the past 100 years. Now, talk about a paternal society with a church that education in Ireland in the 2000s was, or the 20th century, was all Catholic church education. That was the public education. Women were always the servants and whatever, but yet they have come light years above us.
Yeah, because
And-
Robinson was the president. A woman was president of Ireland, right?
But, in so many ways, they have come up to the plate and, made it known that, but is that, and economically they're doing well, it just, I understand individually, but I guess it depends upon, where you're coming from and who you're listening to.
Yeah, and
Unfortunately.
as I said,
And who you're with, because I think, when you go into the white idea or the conception of just white areas, I think that so much of the prejudice that people have is of the unknown. And I guess I've lived in an area, I didn't grow up in a diverse community, but I lived in Manhattan in New Jersey, where there's always been a diversity.
yeah, and
So,
that's, and that is clearly
hard.
that is not the reality. Even if you go into the heart of the South, you'll still find a lot of racial diversity, but there's no confusion in the structure of the society. There's no crossing over. You're not going
well,
to.
I disagree in the sense that I saw more interracial couples in my short time in the Carolinas than I've ever seen. And maybe I'm not in Manhattan often enough anymore, but it was surprising to me.
So
it really was.
Yeah, and I think that is true, but there's an awful lot of people, I think, especially in the white evangelical community, they're not going to say it, but they look around, they see a lot of interracial couples too. And they see the end. They see in interracial couples, there's the end of everything that they have thought was going to last forever, the kingdom that was supposed to last forever. How are they going to do that? And, we think, oh, well, in the 60s, guess who's coming for dinner, brought all that out in the open. Well, we are not yet aware of how deep many of those values and those ideas really ran and still run. And again, Hitler's power was, he told the German people to look around them, and they saw the desolation and the devastation of everything that had happened, and he blamed it on the Jews. Now, I think there's a similar kind of thing going on. There's a deep resentment. The border issue, oh my gosh, what is the border issue about? Well, we're being invaded by those people, We're not allowed to talk about the fact that American society is desperately in need of workers. We are in need of workers. But we're being invaded. And then the whole racial issue, which is, I'll talk a little bit about what I imagine goes on in private rooms down in Mar-a-Lago when they have to face an African-American prosecutor. This is unthinkable. And a woman, an African-American woman who is the prosecutor, that's the abomination of desolation. And all they have to do is say, look, you see, our whole way of life is being overrun. And they invent terms like, what are we all called? The liberals, the people that, the Marxists. They call us Marxists and socialists and all these names, all the names that are called of us. And in the end, you look at what they're losing, or what they feel they're losing, and they're ready to go to war. They're ready.
Frightening.
As I said, my family still, they're farmers, but they exist in what I call cowboy culture. And the cowboy culture, it is not progressive, my friends. Not at all. And they are ready. They are ready to take arms. They're ready to say, we're going to fight, and the politicians of the last election used the metaphors of fighting to save your country.
And that got you to January 6th, didn't it?
Yes, it did. And I still think it isn't just that it got those individuals to January 6th. I still think there's a massive amount of people who wish January 6th would have been bigger. And that it would have been big enough to see to it that those people were celebrated as heroes of the new American way.
Which might happen.
I don't know, but I know that the resentment is deep. The resentment is very deep. And honestly, the confusion is deep. I have a friend who is also a clergy person. He's not from this area, but he was very proud of the fact that when his daughter announced to him that she was a lesbian, that even in he's very conservative Christian, but he was able to love her and support her and basically mended his ways. He listened to her and he grew in his, he grew. It was his daughter. And that's often how people change their mind,
Oh, yeah.
That's where that's it. The person to person change, right? So he was pretty proud of the fact that, he had been able to expand his mind to that. Now that was a few years ago. Now his daughter, as a lesbian woman, is married to a person who now is announcing that she is going to go through a sex change to identify as a male. Now that gives my friend a little pause, But they have a child. They have a child that they adopted, and so they have a child, and this child now is grown. And so she also has now informed the family that she too is going to go through a sex change. And she's already married to a transvestite. Now, I'm going to tell you.
It gets complicated, doesn't it?
I mean, and this is a guy who wants to be able to say, okay, I can embrace this.
I love her.
Right.
Him, they.
I love they. Yep.
But he can't.
Yeah.
He can't. He goes, and in fact, his daughter called him out on it. And because he was going to like Christmas and he was sitting quietly in the corner brooding. And she finally said, I call bullshit on you. I don't think you really are embracing what's happening. And he blew up and stormed out. And they had 2 years in which they did not talk at all. And then, in my friendship to him, when I'm friends with people, I open my big mouth and I say things that, could end the friendship. And at one point I'd had it with him. I just said, I don't know what is the matter with you. Why would you bend this much and then throw down and decide you cannot understand what's going on? If you don't understand, then ask. Have someone explain to you what's going on. But why would you sacrifice and get rid of, the love that you have for your family because you don't understand? So he took a big deep breath and made a renewed effort. He's making a renewed effort. I don't know how successful it's going to be, but he's trying.
Good.
Yeah, but
It's tough.
It's very tough, and I think there isn't. I don't know. Maybe I'm just reading the world wrong, but I just don't feel like there's an abundance of patience in the world these days. Or an abundance of tolerance to be able to hang in there and to say, but I don't understand. I don't understand. Instead, you know, I know a young girl that was on one of the mission trips that we went on, and she's gone off to college. And while she's in college, she came out, and she came out to her family that, you know, she's a lesbian. But her family are members of a very, very hostile fundamentalist church. And the church is winning the argument with the family. And this girl, isolated in college, is feeling horrible, horrible experiences of rejection and isolation. And of course, in my experience, you know, it's the number one cause of suicide.
That's
Absolutely.
And,
Absolutely.
and I want to say, why, parent, why would you dangle your child's life out over a cliff like that? Why would you let your church go on and on and on about how a lesbian girl is going to burn in hell?
She's going to get there a lot faster, isn't she?
I just,
Well, it just goes against the teachings of Christ, though. If you say you're a
Absolutely.
Christian, how can you not love your child because they recognize in themselves something that is maybe not pleasing to you, but they're being true to themselves? Jesus didn't say, I can only be friends with these kinds of people and not those. He often was the champion of the downtrodden and the ones who were reviled. And, you know, he went out of his way to be the friend of the tax collectors and the whores and all the people that you wouldn't want to be, that your church would not want you to be friends with. There's a big difference between Jesus and the church sometimes, I think.
No.
write that down. Write that down. Somebody write that down.
Jesus probably would have been thrown out of a lot of churches nowadays.
I think so.
Probably.
I don't want to.
But see, I think,
It's a shame. I mean, you know.
It's, we can shake our heads and say, you know, how could they? But it's reality, I know, and that's what's sad.
It's meant to be that way, isn't it?
I think I may have made it.
well,
I hope it's not meant to be.
You can't remember what, I don't know what Michelle wanted.
I think that we really need to make an effort to concentrate on, really, it is the majority of people who do not think those ways.
you're right.
And we're just too quiet. Those of us who are, you know, of different opinion about this and are more accepting of change and so forth, we're just too quiet. And they have all the attention because they're so noisy about it.
I was just thinking that we're the silent majority now,
We are.
because we don't want to make waves. We want to be nice to people, and we want to, you know, what do you do? How do you speak out?
What are your friends?
Got to have good hats. Hats that have, you know, red hats.
Instead of MAGA, have something good on them.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I'm being facetious, but it really, you know, I am perplexed by people who don't want to see change, but they have a case. I mean, they're afraid of change. They want to make America great again. That means make America back 100 years ago.
Yeah, that's
when
right.
They thought it was great. Yeah.
Yep.
Right, but it also takes courage to speak out. And I mean, with Navalny, you know, in Moscow, I mean, people actually defied, you know, the Kremlin, and out, and they happened to them. Who knows? But there was a contrast, you know, good and in evil. I mean, it's right there. It's playing out. Yeah.
One of the things that I see in the in the context of my evangelical family is,
Very.
Jesus said, to be kind and reach out to the downtrodden and to the poor and to the, but they do a tricky thing because they label these people as evil. Once the label of evil is applied, then
You don't have to.
right, then a whole new set of ways to relate to people who are evil are kicked in.
Okay. And actions you can take, yeah.
But weren't the tax collectors considered evil?
Yes. Yes, they were.
They still are. No, I'm kidding.
Amen.
Yeah.
No, they were. And Jesus challenged the labels of evil that people placed on other people. He challenged it. Unfortunately, Psalms like we read tonight don't seem to be aware of the subtlety of being careful of labeling people evil to make sure that evil just doesn't mean something that you're against.
Just that whole thing about black and white, evil and good, this or that, what, it just drives me crazy.
Me too.
Me too. My aunt was a missionary in China, in China and in Africa. And she always told me, make friends with black people. They are so happy people.
It's
Yeah.
true.
And I have.
And so
And good.
those
Yeah.
labels that get applied to people as evil give us excuses for why we can duck under Jesus' mandate, and we just imagine that somehow there were evil people, and the closest that Jesus came was that Jesus really didn't like religious people that labeled other people. He really got pretty cranked up against religious people and their black and white ideas about what right and wrong is. But no one seems to celebrate that side of Jesus too much. He's pretty quickly.
Don't say no one. I really don't believe that. I believe there are plenty of people who celebrate it. We're just quiet about the way we celebrate those things.
Yep.
And we're not so effective in letting other people know. But, the polling and everything that I have been reading indicates to me that we are the silent majority. We're not. Don't let those people fill our minds with, all this crap.
Yeah, so how do we go from being silent to finding the voice? I mean, I think there have been plenty of experiences, you remember the march of women,
People with white hair.
women's march, and
I thought you were going to say he was transgender.
so many of the Black Lives Matter movements were supported by black and whites, and a great broad cross-section of America still holds to those very wonderful values of love and acceptance and welcoming the change. I mean, that's how the laws changed for gay and lesbian people to get married.
Yeah, it wasn't that long ago that black and white people couldn't get married in a
Right.
lot of southern states. It was only 1967, I think, when Loving versus Virginia allowed that marriage to happen in Virginia without being thrown in jail for loving someone whose skin color was a little different hue. I mean, how ridiculous can people be?
Well, they're, yeah.
We can be pretty ridiculous. All of us.
Mm-hmm.
All right, my friends. Well,
Especially if we're not educated.
I agree. Education becomes the key to it all. Because
think so.
it's in education that you more understanding and more acceptance of the way the world is. And even seeing that the world can be chaotic sometimes and not be evil. You know, chaos is not always the definition of evil. Sometimes chaos is just fun in the park. It's just a party. A party's pretty chaotic, you know? It's supposed to be. All right. Thank you, my friends.
You.
Once we got started, we found some important things to set straight in the world, so that's good. And
Sure.
we were actually able to attend the wedding of a king, and that's not bad either. Thank you, and good night. I hope you have a
Good night.
restful evening.
Good night.
Goodbye. Goodbye to those of you who are listening and watching online. If you get the urge that you want to participate in our roundtable, all you have to do is just send me an email at revlouis@aol.com, and I'll send you the link for the Zoom, or send me your comments and your questions, and I'll engage as well. Thank you. Good night.